Welcome to the 19th session of our study in the book of Judges. And we're going to be looking at chapter 14. When we looked at chapter 13 in our last session, basically it was a prologue to an introduction to the family that Samson was coming into. And now we're going to be looking at, and all, of course, all the promise that could be found in this future son, who God was calling to be the next judge. And so now we get to know Samson, and we get to know him pretty quickly, see some of his flaws pretty quickly. So this chapter is only 20 verses long. I don't expect it to be a very long lesson, but let's get right into it and get to know Samson. And this is not the elementary school, Sunday school version. I'm using the New International Version Bible. So here we go. Chapter 14, beginning in verse 1 through 7. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother, and as they were approaching the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. We'll pause there. Okay, let's get an idea here. First of all, Samson's guy has an eye for the ladies, and I want to explain. Remember from the previous lesson, he was from the town of Zorah, and now it says that he's went down to Timnah. Now, my English maps that I've been using for the Judges study, it doesn't show Timnah, at least the English one. My Spanish one did, and because of that, I knew where on the map to mark it. So I want you to see, close up, he's from Zorah, and he goes down to Timnah. Now, Timnah is on the edge of the really Philistine section of the country. And yes, they are all under the domination of Philistia, but rather than be looking for somebody over here, he goes down here and in Timnah sees this young woman, and as custom, parents set up the marriage contract, basically. And so he just basically goes home and says, "I want you to get her for me as wife." Of course, she has no say in it, but that's normal. It's usually the parents of the man and the woman who decide on these things. But Samson is like, "No, that's the one. Couldn't you find a nice Jewish girl?" And remember, he is a Nazarite. He's supposed to be consecrated to God. And he's insisting on this Philistine pagan woman to be his wife. And he doesn't give up. Now, like the Bible tells us in parentheses, His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. If you remember the previous lesson, we saw that they had broken the cycle, the judges' cycle, and they were being punished. They were under the control of the Philistines, but they never cried out to God for help. God came to intervene on his own volition and of his own volition. And so really he is working against what everyone else is doing and wanting. And in this case, it would make sense for a Nazarite to marry a good Jewish girl. But God is using the selfish and wandering eye of Samson to actually set things in motion. And so the parents don't realize this, but God is actually using the weaknesses of Samson to get something started. And, it's basically, I saw her, I want her, get her for me. Not a very nice way of doing things or saying things. Not a nice way of speaking to your parents. Kind of goes against that commandment, that fourth commandment, honor your parents. It's like, he wanted her, get her for me. And then on the way down, he somehow, because every time it talks about him and his parents, or his father and mother and him, or going down to Timnah, he always seems to get separated from them, because in this case he gets confronted by a lion, and I've underlined this because it's very specific. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. A young goat, to tear apart a young goat, he's got a lot, he's strong. If he's strong enough to do that, but of course a goat is not trying to kill you at the same time. In this case, it's like the Spirit of the Lord came and gave him the superness, the superpowers to be able to kill this lion who's trying to kill him, who's got long talons and teeth, opposed to a goat. So yes, he is powerful on his own because God is with him, and he is powerful enough that apparently he could, tear a young goat apart. Who would want to do that? But he's strong enough to do that. But for the lion, for this extra special, it's like the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. It was like Shazam. I'm here like I like the Marvels and the DC comic, and all those superheroes. And but Shazam was always one of those where it's like an ordinary guy, and it's like Shazam, and now he's powerful, extra powerful, and he can do things that he couldn't do before. And so when I read this, it reminded me of Shazam. It's just like all of a sudden he's got all this extra power, and he's capable of treating a roaring lion who's attacking him as if it were just a household goat. Keep this in mind. Okay, because we're going to see his power coming at different times in his story, and sometimes it's just him, and sometimes it's the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him in power for this extra special, extra strength. So we just, this is where we are. Even that makes me wonder, did he even look like so many of our coloring book pictures of a big, strong, muscled, weightlifter kind of thing, Hercules looking thing, this big, strong, bulging muscles? Or maybe he didn't look like that. And so when he showed such great power um, it was surprising to people because it was more than humanly possible. Yes, he might have been strong for a human, but there were certain cases where he acted with this extra power. Um, we'll see as we go through chapters 14, 15, and 16. Today's 14, and we're going to continue now. He's gone down. They've talked to the woman. He likes her. Okay, so the contract is kind of put together. And the next section, verses 8 through 11, is probably when it says sometime later, the custom, even in the time of Mary and Joseph, hundreds of years later, the custom is you make the contract and then about a year later, you have a year of betrothal and then you get married. So, verse 8, sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. In it was a swarm of bees and some honey, which he scooped out with his hands and ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, told you he keeps on getting separated from them, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Now his father went down to see the woman, and Samson made a feast there, as was customary for bridegrooms. When he appeared, he was given 30 companions. Hey, we stop there again. Okay, so somehow he gets separated from his parents on the way down to get married, and he kind of goes to check out this carcass that he had left. And this is why I say it was probably a year later, because now it's basically bones. It's it's not anything resembling the lion, except it was a convenient place for bees to create a beehive, and then he scoops out honey from it, probably honeycomb, and is just chewing on the honeycomb and licking the honey coming out of it. And I want to say one thing about that. It's a lion's carcass. What is one of the things that Nazarites are not supposed to touch? Dead bodies. Dead animals, dead humans, dead bodies. You're not supposed to touch them because it makes you unclean. Well, honey, he's about to marry a Philistine woman. He's already planning to be unclean anyway. So he's not being a very good Nazarite. And then he gives some of the honey to his parents, and his parents eat it, but he doesn't tell them where he got it from, because they would know that what he just did was wrong and was not being a good Nazarite. So he goes there, and as was the custom for it's this week-long 7-day debauchery, which is again is not the Jewish way, but this is what they're going to do. This is the custom there. So he shows up and he makes this feast, as is customary for bridegrooms. And when he appears, the people in Timnah give him 30 companions to get drunk with. So they're all Philistines. Okay? So he's getting drunk with a bunch of Philistine guys. This is part of his wedding process. Okay? And this is where we end up with at this point in that portion of reading. Let's continue with verse 12, verses 12 through 15. Okay? This is another custom. In ancient times, and you'll see it in a lot of different ancient stories, riddles. Riddles are a big deal. It's traditional to give a riddle, and whoever is bright enough to solve it it has higher prestige. And in some Greek God stories, lines, or whatever, it's what saves the city, and things like that. But verse 12, "Let me tell you a riddle," Samson said to them. "If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Tell us your riddle, they said. Let's hear it. And he replied, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. For 3 days they could not give the answer. On the 4th day, and we'll stop there for a sec. Some translations say 7th day. It makes more sense on the 4th day, but I'm not going to say that it has to be. It depends on what manuscripts were used, original manuscripts were used for the version that you might have. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? Okay, first of all, let's start right at the end there. I didn't invite you here. It's like, when he appeared, he was given 30 companions. They didn't have to, it was like, hey, free drinks, let's go. But now they're getting worried that, they're each going to have to come up with one set of clothes, whereas Samson's going to have to come up with 30, but they're all stressed out because they haven't figured out his riddle yet, and it's at least the 4th day. And so they tell his wife, it's like, well, we're just going to kill you, burn you and your father's household to death if you don't find out what the answer is. Yeah, let's threaten the wife. This is good. These are good friends here. People from your same town, the people you grew up with, saying this. And the sad thing is, and we'll find that in this next section, the sad thing is, she doesn't tell Samson. Samson, who can kill a lion and can split a goat without even thinking, she doesn't tell him that she's been threatened, but rather she puts her trust in herself and not in him. So here we see in verses 16 through 18 the outcome of her not telling Samson. Verse 16. Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, he replied. So why should I explain it to you? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, he finally told her, because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. Before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And Samson said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Okay, first of all, here she is. Oh, you don't love me. It's like, you just got married. He doesn't know you. It's like, you don't love me. You he says, I haven't told my parents. Well, first of all, it's like, why should I explain it to you? Well, no. We understand this a little bit better because we have the New Testament that kind of explains a little bit more between husband and wife. He is reacting as a normal patriarchal, he chose his wife, she didn't choose him type of answer. So, why should, you're second class citizen, you're a woman, why would I tell you? Not a good way to start a marriage. And not explaining to his parents, that's no biggie, because, it's not going to cost them anything not to know the answer to the riddle. But his response to her was a little harsh, let's just say. It's like, why? Oh, so why should I explain it to you? Okay, loving husband of mine, thank you so much for this. But her cajoling, her complaining, her crying and sobbing, part of it might have been real because she's afraid for her life and her family's life. But again, tell him what they've threatened you with, but she doesn't. And so she finds out what the answer to the riddle is, and tells, and explains the riddle to her people. Again, this separation of Jews and Philistines, people from Zorah and people from Timnah. She tells her, she chooses her side. She sides with her people. And Samson, his response is like, I'm sure there is not one wife out there who would appreciate her husband calling her a heifer. And he just said, if you had not plowed with my heifer, if you hadn't, dug in through my wife to me, is like, if you hadn't done that, you would not have solved my riddle. He knows this, and he's telling them he knows this, and it's and he's angry about this. And so the last two verses, in fact, let's split them up. I'll do 19 by itself. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. Shazam, remember? The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of their belongings, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he went up to his father's house. I'm going to stop there for just a sec. Okay, here's the second time where it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. Super strength. He goes down to Ashkelon. Ashkelon is on the English map, so I can show it to you. It's right there, right in the middle of Philistia. I mean, he goes right down in the middle of the enemy camp. It just goes in, kills 30 men, strips them, and takes their clothes. I'm sure there's some blood on them. Takes their clothes, takes it back to these 30 men and gives them these clothes, and then goes back home to Zorah, to his father's house. Verse 20. And Samson's wife was given to the friend who had attended him at his wedding. He's so angry, he just leaves her there and goes back home. It's like, just leaves her. Now, technically, they are married, but obviously, he leaves her there as if he doesn't want her. He's not going to stay married to her, and so her father, because now she has been shamed now that she's been left behind, in their society. Who's going to marry her now? So the father gets one of those 30 guys and gives her to him. He's like, here, what's, because that's that. And that's how chapter 14 ends. Now, that's not the end of that story, because of that last verse, chapter 15 is full of Samson's anger. Let's just say it that way. His strength and his anger. And, but yeah, that's how chapter 14 ends. He kills 30 guys in Ashkelon. He goes straight into the enemy's camp, right into the downtown, Ashkelon, and kills 30 Philistines and strips them of their clothes, brings the clothes back and gives it to those 30 men who won the riddle, and then goes storming off back home, leaving his wife behind. And his wife is given to one of those 30 guys by her father. And that's the end of the wedding. Oh, yeah. I told you it's not a long chapter, but it's interesting that he has some issues. He has the roving eye problem and the anger issues. Yet God used those to start, because they, remember, 40 years and they hadn't asked for help from God. They had assimilated. They had, yeah, they were comfortable in marrying into the Philistine families. They were comfortable. They weren't asking God for help. They were used to being under the yoke of the Philistines, and as far as most of them were concerned, oh well, that's just the way it is. And God is trying to really shake things up. The killing of 30 guys in capital city Ashkelon stirs a few things up and starts really forcing the issue. Sometimes God uses instances or weaknesses of someone or something, or uses a country against another for his purpose. And his purpose is always to get the most of us saved and in heaven with him. And so sometimes what seems absolutely out of character is actually part of his character, because he has a long vision. Where we're looking at the moment, he's looking at eternity. When we are looking at Samson going into Ashkelon and killing 30 men and leaving his wife behind, God is looking at Jesus coming, being born in Bethlehem, amongst the Jews, raised under Mosaic law, following God, raised to know God, so raised to live, teach, die, and resurrect, and give us salvation. God's looking at that saying, I've got to do something now to get things rolling so that that can happen, because I have promised that. And I'm going to keep on working even when they don't ask me, when they've given up, when they stopped caring. I still care. Sometimes we might feel that God has stopped caring, but he hasn't. And he knows what needs to be done and when it needs to be done for the final picture, for the final closure. We need to trust him. Trust our Lord. Trust God. He's got it. The Spirit of the Lord can come upon you in power. Ask him for it, for your daily life, for those biggest problems that you see. Ask him. Ask him to guide you, and then follow his guidance. I love you. Next time, chapter 15, and then 16, and then we're done with Judges. Only 2 chapters left before we have completed our study of Judges. This was lesson 19, chapter 14. See you next time. Bye.